Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Milja, along with my good brother Xanatrix Sidare, and we have a very special guest here in the temple, coming to us all the way from Aratalsaurian Games, the madman behind Shadowscar, which we've covered 3 times so far in the temple, the one and only Cody Pondsmith. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here, and I'm ready to talk.
I hope time zone hell wasn't too much of an issue.
No, it's still middle of the day for me, so I'm doing great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's early evening over here, but I just hate time zones on principle.
Yeah.
Some more than others. Looking at you, Australia, you know what you did.
Yeah, they lost the Emu War. They had 2 Lewis guns and they lost the Emu War.
I was just gonna put them in there just for the design of the Owen. But now I have to kind of do this because this is a tradition with every newcomer into the temple. But I got to go into the origin story, the humble beginnings, as it were. So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick. I realize some of this is going to be somewhat redundant, but I have to abide by my traditions.
Okay. So as most people are probably aware, or at least it picked up from my name, I grew up in a role-playing game family. I kind of learned about TRPGs when I was very, very young, like pre-10. I got into my first game, as it were, when I was like 9 or 10, playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Outer Space, run by my father, Mike Pondsmith, with a bunch of my friends from school. So that was like my first introduction to it. It was a great time. It was a fun game. A bunch of preteens getting together and drinking too much soda and having snacks and running a comedy RPG was, a ton of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of evolved from there, running through different games that we had made. I played Mechton for a long time. I played Cyberpunk probably earlier than I should have. And I kind of grew up on a lot of Aratalsaurian games until I was in my middle teens when I started to branch out into other games. Notably, one of the first games I played outside of our games was actually 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
That's
I was in a. I was invited to a game by my at the time girlfriend, and I was very excited, and it was a complete shit show.
I mean, a lot of gaming groups can be complete shit shows.
As my mentor often said, the first thing you do sucks.
There's sucks, and then there's one of the players having a screaming argument with the GM, who is their dad, over flavor text.
Oh, that
is a level of petty that not even Monk and I will lower ourselves to.
No, I mean I can certainly be petty on some things, but I'm not that low. But we have a bit of a nickname for 4th edition around here. The edition we're supposed to hate, but we don't because the check bounced.
Unpopular opinion, I have no idea, but I think that 4th edition would have been a lot better if it were not D&D. I think if it had been its own thing, people probably would have, taken it in a lot better than they did.
13th Age?
13th Age has done well, but for the longest time I was like, no, nothing would have changed. But as time has gone on, I've thought about it and I've gone, there's a tradition problem in that bubble. That's the best way for me to put it. I've talked about it elsewhere and gotten some particularly enthused folk very mad about that, and I will play it off like a wrestling heel. if you're mad at me, then I'm doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
No, but it definitely sounds like you jumped around between a wide variety of systems, and I do recall when we first found out about Shadow Scar, about our particular amusement because the weeb gene is very strong.
It is. I'm not going to deny that.
Oh, we wholeheartedly approve of that. For a bit of context, Zan and I have gotten our fair share of flack for having the gall to introduce manga and video game elements into TTRPGs and defending games that have done it. So I can assure you, you're in good company. It's one of those things that just amuse me when I see certain patterns. And I suppose the first thing is, with the early days of Shadow Scar, was this like a homebrew setting that you had been kicking around that just evolved into its current form, or did it have a different point of origin?
I mean, that's a surprisingly big question. Initially, the very first like inception point for Shadow Scar was back when I was like 11. I was, at the time, me and my friend were massive Naruto nerds. And we had gotten together one night at like a sleepover, and we were playing a ton of Naruto Ultimate Ninja 1 and thought, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a Naruto role-playing game? And that was the inception point for Shadow Scar, was wouldn't it be amazing if there was a Naruto role-playing game?
There were a couple of video games that tried.
Yeah. So it started out with this sort of grand ideal that was then dropped very quickly afterwards because we were both like 11 and had no idea how to build a role-playing game. And of course, couldn't get the license to do Naruto. So there's that. And then from there, it kind of broke out into its own weird little thing that evolved year after year, kind of with me as I grew up. So it started out as very much like a, let's do a Naruto role-playing game. We're going to copy all the jutsus, all the world lore, all of that stuff. And it evolved later into more of like a fantasy adventure sort of based in that sort of weird semi-Japanese background with ninjas. There was a period in my like tweens and early teens when it was a ninja high school game. And then it kind of focused in my middle to late teens into like a shadow of what it is now. It just got little changes here and there as I ran my own games of it and changed little bits and fixed little things that I found that needed tweaking, until it kind of hit where we are now.
Man, that is quite the journey for the game. It also makes all of our little Naruto and other ninja references during our reviews much more apropos, Monk.
Yeah. See, this is the reason why I have that nickname when it comes to my predictions.
Yeah, we know you're Negrodamus. We know.
Yeah.
I just have to use Nostradamus. I don't have enough melanin for the other name.
Way to self-report.
But
I never would have known.
the monk and I are very similar in a lot of different ways. Complexion is not one of them, and it also is the one that matters least.
We've had the running joke that we are that our best and worst problem is that we are very similar people.
Not a bad problem to have in a lot of cases.
It's also the reason I can get under his skin all the time.
Yes. But I do find the Naruto association funny because, well, in part, some of the stuff that I've covered in the past has dipped into that. I suppose one of the biggest examples would be the Ninja Crusade. And of course, the Naruto 5e project I've talked about on multiple occasions, which is not what a lot of people think it is. I'll have to get into that later, but so given that, what could you tell me about the transition point between doing that Ninja High School approach to the idea of this cross-dimensional adventure that you ended up doing with Shadowscar?
So it really started out as moving into, it's kind of always moved in and out of this sort of like very much almost sort of Rurouni Kenshin, Inuyasha, like, you know, kind of fantasy Japan adventure kind of game. And at one point it was on that sort of that end of the cycle, after I kind of had, I guess, gotten old enough that I didn't want to do a Ninja High School game, or I forgot exactly why it changed from that, but I started running it myself, and I was, you know, running it for my friends and kind of changing the game based on what happened there. And as I was building it, as I was running it, there were a lot of things that came in as part of that, you know, things like, you know, different shinobi groups and eventually different worlds, because I hit that point that I think you often hit in games where I'm like, I need to present something new to my players or whatever. We've been playing with a long amount of time, and I presented this multidimensional aspect just as like a thing in my personal games, and that was cool, and it allowed me kind of continue the game and, you know, freshen it up a bit, flesh it out, you know, that sort of thing. But it didn't go into the actual concept until much later, when I had kind of like determined that this is something I wanted to do long term. And I talked to Mike. I sat down with him and basically said, hey, you know, I want to do this as a marketable product. Could you, you know, give me some, you know, pointers here? And we sat down for like a couple hours, and I went over all the stuff for Shadowscar, and he gave me feedback on it. And one of the really big points that he brought up was, you know, I was doing this multidimensional thing in my own games, and that would be a really cool selling point for the game itself. So that was kind of the big push for me to bring that, you know, multiple dimension concept into the full game, rather than it being more of a sort of traditional, you know, semi-Japanese fantasy type, you know, setting, much more of like an adventure-based game. And then the addition of that multidimensional aspect kind of helped to build what the Shadowscar Agency is, because originally it was a bit vaguer. It was more like you had clans of shinobi, and you picked a clan that you were part of, but there wasn't really this sort of singular binding narrative concept. It was a little more sort of like you're ninjas from different, you know, walks of life who wind up together kind of situation. And bringing in the multidimensional aspect and the conflict that would become the Veil War kind of necessitated this greater, you know, overall faction that everybody would be part of, that would then group everybody together.
Yeah, I can get that. And I do remember when I was looking at the different plans and the techniques that I had, one of the things that I ended up getting reminded of, and maybe this is a coincidence, maybe not, but I ended up getting reminded of the faction system that permeated a lot of the different games in the White Wolf universes. And I'm curious if that was an influence or not.
Not really. I've only ever really played one White Wolf game. I played Vampire the Masquerade for a while. It was a fun game. I had a Ventrue character. I was a lawyer. But I did not interact with that a whole lot because it was basically just like me and our GM and a few other players. We had like the core book. We didn't go super deep into it. So I can't speak to that much because I didn't really encounter it that often. I was inspired by Vampire Masquerade to do a dice pool type system, because I had seen dice pools in a few places, but the one that really stood out to me the most was Vampire. And I remember thinking like, that's a very elegant, straightforward system. It's easy. There's not a whole ton of additive math. Straightforward, easy to learn. But no, I don't know much about their faction system.
Yeah, I would have guessed Shadowrun gave an inspiration for doing D6s, but you're kind of disqualified because there aren't enough pounds of D6.
I thought there was a discussion at one point I had with myself. Exactly how many dice do I want people to be having to roll? And I erred on the side of caution in that circumstance.
Which is fair, and in that same vein, I recall my many years with Legend of the Five Rings and how they kind of have a rule of 10 regarding how many dice you can roll, and if you go over that, you're keeping more dice, and if you go past that, there's other bonuses. But it's very, very hard to get that high up. It can happen. It's just not going to happen easy. Now,
yeah,
I'd like to pick your brain on something that Zan and I ended up doing during our episodes of Valley of the Judged, which, from what I recall hearing, you did watch to a certain extent, so you got a feel for our particular brand of chaos.
I did. I prepared.
So there are six clans, 6 major clans, and I'd like to do a little bit of word association. Consider this the geekiest Rorschach test you will ever do.
Okay.
So I'm going to go from top to bottom on them, and I'd like a character from any brand of fiction. Doesn't have to be anime, doesn't have to be ninja related, any brand of fiction, period, that comes to mind when it comes to that clan.
Oh, so that's tricky, but I'll give it my best, as it were.
All right. Starting with the Arashi clan.
So the Arashi clan, let's see. See, my brain always freezes up on these. It's like everything I know goes out of my head. I think that there are some that come to me, things like Kiba from Naruto. Is it Gon from whatchamacallit? Seven Deadly Sins, the blue-haired one. Let's see.
That's a couple good ones.
Yeah.
So moving on from that, the Futsumashi clan.
Futsumashi clan, Moroku's not the pull there, but maybe Sesshomaru. Pulling from sort of the samurai-esque arts, is it the Scion of House Mori in Sengoku Basara? Let's see, what's another good one? Oh god, that's what kind of comes to mind at the moment.
Yeah, I could see it. Next would be the Hibana clan, and I did make an Uchiha joke or two just because having a clan mon that's a fan, that's immediately where I'm gonna gravitate to.
I mean, Sasuke is not a bad pull. Both the fire techniques and his actually fairly prominent use of like like ninja tools, shuriken, razor wire,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. So Sasuke's not a bad pull for that. There's Sarutobi Sasuke from Sengoku Basara.
Mhm.
Because the Hibana were kind of looking at more like that traditional ninja kind of flair. I could kind of see. Oh no, I'm not getting the name. Yeah, it'll come to me later. I'll be sitting there 2 hours from now. Let's see.
Yeah, sometimes these things can be tricky. Even Zen and I have stumbled on this kind of thing with our own work.
Oh,
Yeah.
Don't get me started. Jesus. No, if I'm going to pick one for the Hibana clan, though, I'm going to choose Ishikawa Goemon from the 2009 Goemon movie.
Okay.
He uses methods new and old to do everything he can.
Mhm. But moving
Also
from
trained as the right hand of Oda Nobunaga in that one.
yeah, moving from that would be the Kuromaku clan.
So the Kuromaku clan, I pull more from non-anime concepts. So there is like, James Bond, Man from U.N.C.L.E., a lot of the sort of traditional spy stuff in there. There are some characters in there. It doesn't necessarily fully pull, but for some reason I pulled like Gojo from oh my god, my brain is entirely blanked. Jujutsu Kaisen.
Mhm.
Satoru Gojo? Yeah, I could see something.
Yeah. A little bit sort of Death the Kid from Soul Eater.
I guess that explains why their moan is so symmetrical.
Yep.
Okay, how could I not bring that up? Yeah,
Those are the ones that come to mind.
mm-hmm. I could certainly get it if I, given what you mentioned about leaning into spy fiction. I could also see, even though he's not a spy technically, Golgo 13.
I mean, if I'm going to pull in spy fiction, I'm going to pull in one I've been playing a lot recently, Snake.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Just don't
Especially
bring
the big boss version of Snake.
But next, of course, the penultimate would be the Tante.
So the Tante, I would pull a lot of. It's maybe shade to say I would pull a lot of the sort of classic anime heroes, Naruto, any sort of cock no jutsu type characters.
Mm-hmm.
I would pull. Let's see. Yeah, it's interesting because we're looking for something that's got a lot of willingness to forgive, as it were. Accepting, openness, honestness, that sort of thing. It generally tend to be big, main character traits, as it were.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit like Black Star from Soul Eater.
For whatever reason, the protagonist from Kekaishi also comes to mind.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Especially since, well, his whole gimmick was all about manipulating different types of barriers. Hence the name of the anime.
Mm-hmm.
But the last of the six would be the Wanami.
So, Wanami, have, for some reason, much stronger for this because Lonami is one of my favorites. I would pull like the swordsman from Soul Eater, a little bit of the sort of like intensity of like Itachi Uchiha kind of that kind of character. I could see like maybe Nobara from Jujutsu Kaisen, the sort of ruthlessness towards the enemy, as it were. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
That gives me vibes of any of the characters from the God Eater franchise, to be honest.
I could see it.
Especially Soma.
Mm-hmm.
Soma wanted to take out those everything.
And
He wanted to kill everything because they'd taken everything from him.
And speaking of the whole interdimensional thing, part of the reason I found that interesting is there's not a whole lot of games out there back then or even now that have interdimensional travel as part of their design. There's plenty of games that claim to have a multiverse, but in terms of jumping between universes, there's nothing hard and fast about how that's supposed to work. The major one I can think of that dips into that same pool is The Strange. And that's there's probably a few others, but that's the only major one I can think of where traveling between dimensions is part of the point. And one of the things I was also curious about is since we're dealing with a very ninja themed kind of game, obviously stealth had to be a big part of that. Was it relatively easy or was it tricky to create a stealth system within the game that didn't fall into traps of predecessors?
It was tricky in a lot of ways, but the biggest was that I found that trying to build a stealth system that is front and foremost in the game kind of runs counterintuitive to a lot of the things that you honestly assume. Building out a basic stealth system was pretty easy. You know, a lot of it is just, you know, how do I determine whether they saw me or not?
Mm-hmm.
How do I determine whether I can sneak by them? You know, which is all very straightforward. You know, we added in things like special senses. So there's like, here's some things you're going to have to think about overcoming because your enemy might be more perceptive in some way than, you know, an average person.
Mm-hmm.
But the really tricky part for that was that, as I said, it runs counter to a lot of things. One of my biggest eye-opening moments in writing Shadowscar was I was running the Eyes in the Darkness adventure just as a test for my playgroup.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going through it and they were you know, being careful, checking their corners, you know, using distractions, pulling people out into you know, off into the forest and assassinating them and things like that. And I got to a point in this encounter, you know, they're trying to sneak into this like village and take out an enemy. And I got to a certain point in the adventure and I'm like, oh my god, they have not been in combat once. Like
Mm-hmm.
they haven't gotten into initiative like a single time. And I had to stop and I was like, wait, that's the point. If they went into combat, they've blown their cover. It's actually really amazing that they have done this entire thing and never initiated initiative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they are being stealthy first and foremost.
Yeah, which certainly fits. I mean, you look at plenty of stealth action video games, and inevitably someone's going to try a no detection run. Whether it be in Deus Ex, whether it be in the proper Thief games, whether it be in Metal Gear Solid, there's always somebody who's going to do that. You will inevitably find that kind of run, and in some cases, like the aforementioned Thief, getting into combat is the last thing you want, because even though you can hold your own a little bit, once the bigger guns start coming out, it's a good time to get the hell out of there. So so it's completely understandable if that was gonna happen.
It's interesting to try to account for, because so much of the sort of expected gameplay of RPGs kind of focuses around combat. So it's kind of an interesting requirement to kind of change your preconceptions, I guess, about playing an RPG. You know, if you assume that, okay, stealth is your primary and combat is your last resort, then you play the game very differently. And, you know, combat is an option in Shadowscar. We have a full combat system. It's pretty fun, if I do say so myself. But it really is the last resort in your mission. You should be focusing on being, you know, like a shadow, like a ghost on the wind. And, you know, combat only really pops off if you know, either A, you know, you don't sneak up on somebody effectively, or B, you know, want to have that climactic fight with, you know, Nemesis, or, you know, your assassination target or something like that.
Yeah, the duel in the burning temple, as the cliche goes. But I'm also remiss if I didn't bring up and I think I brought this up during the Valley episode about I likened what I saw with this with Legend of the Five Rings, which does have a combat system and does a very good job with it. But it's also very unforgiving with the fact that even at the highest tier, you are a couple good hits away from death. It is that game's way of hammering home that this is not meant to be a combat-centric affair. This is a game far more about political intrigue. Combat is just, as the saying goes, politics by any other means. Now, one of the things when it comes to characters that I was a bit curious about, since obviously we didn't get the full range of understanding regarding techniques and regarding Mikyo, but when you were designing Mikyo, was there, aside from the use of ki, was there a dividing line between what would be treated as a technique and what would be treated as a Mikyo?
Generally, it is the use of magic. Techniques are anything that you can do that does not really require the expense of that mana effect of your ki, basically. It gets a little bit tricky when you deal with tattoos and like crafting of items. Generally, techniques are things your character can do inherently, new abilities that they have access to that do not require ki. The tattoos, I have a number of tattoos that have magical effects, but they are all like static magical effects that you can get to the whole of your body. Or crafting things, which can be used to make magic things like Ofuda talismans and magical poison and stuff like that. But generally, techniques is all stuff that you either know how to do without magic, or it's a crafting component, or it's a change to your body that in some way gives you more capabilities. And then,
go ahead,
Sam.
I was going to say, I guess that the dividing line there sounds like a Mikyo is something that must supernaturally interact with the environment in general, rather than you in specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that in the full book, each of the clans will have like a short list of the available techniques and Mikyo to agents of that clan. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. So every clan has a group of Mikyo and a group of techniques that are accessed at the beginning of character creation, where I believe it is 6 of each. which you can take at character creation, and then as you achieve higher ranks in the agency, you gain access to more techniques in Mikyo that you get at Chunin and Jonin rank as you kind of become a higher tier, a shinobi or agent in the agency.
We actually have a question regarding the tattoos from the infamous Mr. Blodia. Bloodia. I want to say Blodia just because I have Jin Saotome and Mecha on the brain. They're asking, do tattoos incur some sort of penalty?
No. Tattoos, we have effectively two types of tattoos at the moment. One, which are the communication tattoos, the mouth, ear, and eye tattoos that allow you to communicate with your team, be communicated with in response, and translate your speech and reading. And then tattoos that are used to augment your physical capabilities, whether that's to make you stronger, to make you more resistant to pain, to make you more intelligent, those sorts of things. But they do not have traditional penalties to having them.
Okay, yeah. So there's your answer, Bloodia.
Mm-hmm. Now, given that, since you brought up the rank thing with Genin and the like, is it a case where you would advance along those ranks based on a total amount of XP spent, like Insight ranks in L5R, or do you have a different approach on how one would go up the ranks?
So your rank is determined partially by your requisition points, which represents kind of how much you are trusted by the agency.
Mm-hmm.
As your requisition points raise, you get closer and closer to sort of plateaus at which you go up in rank. Your requisition ranks start at 3, with you as a Genin, the lowest tier of agent in the agency,
mm-hmm.
and you raise it by successfully performing missions. As you perform more missions successfully, your requisition rank goes up higher and higher, and then at certain points you pass over into the next rank and rank up to Chunin or Jonin. Jonin being the highest that you'll probably ever play of the ranks in the agency.
Mm-hmm. And that's given that is it going to be a case where at each set, it's kind of hinted at in the whole improving your agent part of the character sheets in the box set, but at each session are you getting one improvement option no matter what?
Yes. I played a lot of games, I've run a lot of improvement systems, and I wanted to pull honestly a little bit from like Monster of the Week and other Powered by the Apocalypse games,
mm-hmm.
where the turnaround of abilities is faster. So yeah, at the end of every session in Shadowscar, you get a point for improvement. Now, you may not spend that on something that gives you a benefit immediately. Taking abilities and raising stats, for instance, requires more points than just one. But at the end of every session, you get a point for improvement.
Yeah. I really like that type of system. It's a system that we tend to use when we do our actual play series. Is we'll just count the end of session as milestone for milestone leveling purposes, and people get their level up and all their fun stuff. Because it's very clear from the way the system was presented, even in Eyes in the Darkness and in the media release quick start that we were given, that your requisition rank and your rank as an agent is very separate from your agent improving. And I very much like that those are separated, because you can improve over the course of one mission multiple times, so that the mission is a little less likely to kill you.
Yeah. Not to
Without
mention
having
it's a nice little nod to the source material, because remember, even at his height for the longest time, Naruto was still a Genin.
Yeah, he didn't make Jonin until after the show was over.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went Jonin and then straight to 7th Hokage.
Yeah. And in that same vein, and this is something I've talked about in many conversations when it comes to adapting stuff like manga or comic books into tabletop games, is that slow advancement over a lengthy campaign isn't how a lot of those stories kind of work. You in comic books, obviously, there's more of an emphasis on side grades before returning to a status quo, obviously. But you look at the various characters, especially in shonen battle manga, and to a certain extent, some seinen. There's never a bunch of incremental increases in the same way a lot of TTRPGs might have it. It is significant jumps. If I'm going to continue using the Naruto example, the big jump in that regard was using Rasengan for the first time.
Monk, I would say that the big jump is at the very beginning of the show. The biggest jump, the fact that he can use Kagebunshin so much better than anyone else.
That I could see.
Yeah, but the Rasengan was definitely like the next super big thing in Naruto.
Yeah.
Another question from Blodia. He also confirmed that he is inspired by Jin Saotome, so he's guilty as charged. Will
Nice.
missions be divided into submissions for more opportunities for leveling and advancement? I think this is technically already answered by how we talked about the separation. Missions, like the mission we actually saw in Eyes in the Darkness or in the actual quick start materials, they're going to take place over multiple sessions. It's not going to be a one session thing with especially with the quick start. Eyes in the Darkness probably could be if you really wanted to jam pack it, but I could see it being separated into maybe two. And you'll get the personal advancement points. That's just what I'm going to call them for right now. For your character at the end of every session, you'll get a point that you can spend into the advancement chart that a character sheet has in order to advance your character. Whereas advancing your actual rank within the agency is just going to be incumbent on your successful missions and how high your requisition rank goes.
Yeah.
So I don't think you'd really need submissions for that. I think it would just really depend on how often you play and how long your missions take.
I think submissions would be a table-by-table thing, but speaking of missions, I did want to ask if you plan on putting something akin to a mission generator within the full book.
So there is a mission generator in the full book. That is done and dusted. It has it's a series of tables. We give a little bit of guidance in like the general game master section for how to run a game, and then there are a series of tables to determine like what dimension the mission is happening in, where specifically it's happening, who the enemies are, what they're trying to do, how much time the players have before the enemy finishes their plans. So there is sort of a generator in there to quickly whip up a mission with all the basics.
I could certainly get that.
And I think, Monk, a generator like that would count for our guidance quota.
Yeah.
Monk and I have a very strong opinion on internal guidance within a game because we have a little motto: every game is someone's first, and having not enough guidance means people are going to get lost. So a table like that has the general building blocks is not only going to give someone a tool to very quickly whip up a mission, it's also going to give them the upper and lower bounds of what missions are generally going to look like. And so that's a lot of guidance. I would hope that there's also some guidance in the core book about making your own dimension to hop to, because it's very clear with your map of the dimensions that most of those are undefined, so that if someone wants to jump into their own dimension, they can.
We have an entire section in the storyteller section about how to integrate your own worlds. It breaks down how to little guidance on how to put in certain specific aspects of your world, how to tailor damage and armor and movement for creatures in that world. A little bit of guidance on how to do items and unique things from that setting. So we do have some guidance on that. That was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure was in there, since one of the things we want people to do the most is to bring their own settings into Shadowscar.
Hmm. I can certainly get that, especially given the width of the settings that are already present. Now, since this kind of thing is dipping a little bit into spy fiction, one of the things that a lot of people are no stranger to when it comes to spy fiction is the out there weird and wacky gadgets, or whatever Q has cropped up this week that he knows he's not getting back. So I'm curious in the equipment setup if there are going to be plans on how one could customize certain equipments.
So we don't really have equipment customization rules, partially because we have erred on the side of giving a lot of equipment. Mm-hmm. We have the armory, which is open to any character who's still part of the agency. You can always requisition gear before you go on a mission, so you can tailor what you need for your mission before you embark. But in doing that, we have a pretty massive list of, here's all the weapons you might have. Here's a bunch of consumable tools that you might use. Things like, animal treats, bombs, traps. Here's some things you might need, like, rope ladders and breathing devices and, vehicles, things like that. Mm-hmm. Poisons, elixirs, and drugs. We aim to go wide so that you could really customize exactly what your character has in their kit and be able to adapt to just about any situation.
I can get that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, going a bit further into that. Would it? Since you mentioned vehicles, I think that's one other thing to kind of lean into, and that is vehicle chases. Much like with stealth, was that a tricky one to nail down, or was that relatively easy?
It was tricky. We eventually sort of landed on a chase mechanic, more or less, that we show off in easy mode and the starter set. But it's always a little bit tricky because you have to figure in moving vehicles and what actually makes a chase sequence. Where we kind of came to was that the movement of the vehicles doesn't really matter as much, because what you're caring about is the locational difference between the two vehicles. If my vehicle is moving 120 miles per hour, it doesn't really matter unless, for instance, the other vehicle is moving 60 miles per hour. It matters, the distance between the two vehicles, and in some cases, whether you're coming up on a roadside cliff or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's why we kind of landed where we are, which is we have this road track, and you were always at one point on this track. And you kind of jockey between two spaces, how close are you to your opponent, how far away are you, and at what distances can you do certain things. I believe every road track section counts for about 50 feet. So, if you're this far back, you can hit them with a ranged weapon. If you're so far back, you're out of range. If you're up in the same band as you are, you can physically attack them from melee range or try to jump onto their car or something like that. So rather than kind of focusing on the movement of vehicles, we tried to focus on the actions players can take at different sort of distances between the vehicles.
Which certainly makes sense. You look at a lot of chase sequences in film, and distance to each other matters more than speed. And the only time speed matters is when you're either trying to get to somebody or get away from somebody. And
speed only matters when you're doing the wide shots as well, because that's when most people are going to see the two vehicles moving in tandem with each other, and if you don't break that up with the wider shots that show exactly how fast they're going, the chase starts to lose momentum in people's minds.
I suppose it also matters when somebody tries multi-track drifting.
That train should have derailed.
Yeah, but I had to get at least one initial D joke out of my system.
Yeah, it's a parody of an initial D joke.
Still counts. But
Mhm.
given that, I know we mentioned the whole thing about how the clans treat technique in Mikyo. Is there a similar thing when it comes to equipment, like say a starting package, or even suggested items for each clan?
No. Generally, we leave exactly how you want to build your agent to you. There are pieces that obviously fit well for different clans, and there's a little bit of just kind of that's why you kind of figure out your abilities before you figure out your gear, kind of figure out what works in context of what your character can do. But we wanted to leave the decision of exactly what your character has on them at any one time as open as possible, so that you can build to a very specific idea, because you're going to be in a lot of different situations, so it's a little harder to find one specific set of gear.
Yeah. Now, I know I did the I did the character comparison thing, but when it comes to the jump between, say, Genin to Chunin, is the main thing that would change just a higher requisition, or are there other benefits you'd get as you go up on those ranks?
So, besides the higher requisition rank, ranking up to Chunin, for instance, gives you access to Chunin level techniques in Mikyo. So there are a number of new techniques in new Mikyo that you would be able to learn after ranking up to that second rank, now that you are sort of better respected and trusted within the agency, but also within the clan that you're part of. There are also more artifacts. So you have magical items that are requisitionable through the armory. There are Genin, Chunin, and Jonin artifacts. So you reach up to Chunin, you have access to more different artifacts. So they're, besides just having that high requisition level, there are sort of these plateaus of abilities that open up for you.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. So is in the armory, is there a column where it lists off the requisition points that's going to take up, as well as the minimum rank?
Where it matters. Most items do not have a minimum rank. They just rely on requisition points. So, for instance, if you're starting out and you have a requisition level of 3, you're going to have a harder time requisitioning a car that has a requisition of 6. You're going to need to go in with a partner on that sort of thing. But where it does matter, like artifacts, there are notes for it.
What would be an example of say a Chunin level artifact or a Jonin level artifact?
So, good examples of Chunin and Jonin artifacts. We have the Kongosho, which is it's hard to describe, but it's a Vajra if you're familiar with it. It's a
I'm familiar with a Vajra.
Almost like yeah, there we go. Almost scepter-ish kind of I mean, not weapon, it's more of a ceremonial thing at this point, though it was considered a weapon at one point. And it is used to fire blasts of lightning that can affect creatures in the spirit world, kind of pulling back to its original use as a terrifying weapon in Hindu mythology. There are
Vajra being able to use lightning to destroy spirits is pretty par for the course there.
There are things like what was another good one? We have the gateway token, which is a little metal token that you can activate to summon a gate to your location, which allows you to get out of tight scrapes in a timely and much less harmful, let's say, way.
In a way that's not rift diving.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when I went through the whole rift diving thing, and what immediately came to mind was Nightcrawler's hang up about how he wants to see where he's going whenever he teleports. Because he's afraid if he doesn't, then he's going to teleport himself literally into a wall and get crushed.
Yeah. Another fun one is Pongoko, which is a set of incense that you can burn over the corpse of a relatively recently dead person to summon their spirit back to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to provide a variety of different artifacts that gave interesting uses in the environment to solve specific problems.
A lot of people end up forgetting that necromancy was originally a form of divination, talking with the dead. So it's good to see that presented here. I mean, hell, Zan knows that I had a whole aside with doing necromancers just to show you don't have to be evil or be that kind of necromancer if you're taking that approach.
Yeah.
Oh. I only titled it "Am I Evil?" because I wanted to make a Diamond Head reference. But given that, I will admit when you mentioned artifacts that would be of like Jonin level, one of the first things that came to mind is something like, say, the grass cutter.
Mm-hmm.
Which, technically speaking, I suppose that might even be beyond that particular level.
I can imagine.
Go ahead. Okay. We don't generally do unique items for artifacts because those are fully one of a kind. You can find them in like environments and things like that. So like grass cutter exists, the Kusanagi exists, but there is one of it, and you would have to wrest it from the Imperial family actually at the moment. Mm-hmm. Which is not impossible, but that's its own adventure.
I was about to say, I imagine the Imperial relics are in the hands of the Imperial family. I could actually see a mission around the yokai have stolen one, go find and retrieve it being a mission. I think it would be much more funny to retrieve the Magatama though. That's much more the Yasukuni no Magatama. That would be much more interesting because people can make fakes of that a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I could certainly see it. And now with all of that in mind, I know that there was the different tiers of threats within the rogues gallery. Going from first to fourth rank. I'm guessing that there's going to be a bit of an index dedicated to the threats within the full book, so that a GM could look up what particular threat they need at that moment.
We present the threats in alphabetical order,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's an easy way to make them easily referenced, for the general usage.
All right, I could get that. To further go into that, do you have any advice in the GM section as far as customizing the threats?
As in building threats or customizing the specific creatures themselves?
More of the latter than the former.
We don't generally have a lot as far as customizing the creatures themselves. That's something that we are kind of looking into later for our DLC, our monthly new info and player options for the game. But to start with, we are presenting these creatures as they are, and kind of in their own specific places. There's a certain amount of customization in certain ones because there are things like what, items they carry, what weapons they use, because there are a lot of yokai that don't have inherent natural weapons, so they have to use regular, conventional weapons. But while we have guidance on how to build an encounter, we don't really have guidance on how to customize specific creatures.
And speaking of yokai, one of the big things that you brought in when it comes to the yokai is the whole thing with the commons. I'm curious if that was an idea for that you had developed early on, or was that one that was brought in after some suggestion?
That's one that has been there pretty not since the very beginning, but very, very long ago. Mostly because it's hard to there are a lot of yokai that can disguise themselves as humans and or other creatures, but not all of them can. So that limits what yokai can be used in this type of game. So I wanted to give something for basically, okay, every type of yokai can disguise itself. It's just that some of them are easier to spot than others because they have to wear this mask. Because you can feel the edge of the mask. So if you get into physical contact with the yokai, you can feel the edge of that mask and figure out whether they're a yokai or not.
Yeah. I'm guessing somebody who's skilled enough could tell that there's something not right about someone who's using who is disguised, much in the way that say humanoid monsters in a lot of different fiction. They look humanoid, but there's something not right about them. That uncanny valley kind of thing. We
lean a lot into the idiosyncrasies of the yokai. Interestingly, most yokai have some little idiosyncrasy or trick about their personality that can make them much easier to recognize. It's things like Harionaga or Harihito, ones with the super long barbed hair, refuse to have their hair cut or sort of have it damaged in any way. Yukihito, Yukiona, the ghosts of those who died in the cold, refuse to be in warm rooms. So there are these little keys, these little things that you can test as an agent to see whether the person you're dealing with is human or not, if you have a vague idea of what they might be.
I mean, then there's probably one of the more infamous ones in the West with kappa and cucumbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're going someplace they're going to be kappa, just start throwing cucumbers at people. That's the rule, right?
Yeah, you can throw all the cucumbers that you would have thrown at the Undertaker otherwise. He doesn't like cucumbers.
Okay.
It's a free country and he's free to be wrong. I would tell that to his face too.
I know why he hates them, but still. But damn.
So actually, on something you mentioned when we were talking about the different ranking of the Rogues Gallery, you said that there are some plans for updates instead of a little monthly thing, like kind of like DLC on a game. Is that just going to be upkeep for the core book, or is that going to be some sort of subscription service or something?
So it's 100% free.
Okay.
We do it for Cyberpunk already. We call them our DLCs. Every month we have a new downloadable piece of content, whether that's lore or new player options, new gear, new monsters. It's just a little bit of something that you can download to add to your game, or get better context on the setting or something like that.
Okay, so the reason I ask is because there's no guarantee that every game is going to be treated the same way in the same company.
Mm-hmm.
So always good to clarify.
Yeah.
But I figure Artalsori and you guys are pretty good with the entire base that is tabletop gamers. So I didn't think you're going to do anything that was for lack of a better word, anti-consumer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, with that in mind, I know that we've had easy mode out for a little while. We've had the starter kit out for a little while. What would you be shooting for as far as a release window? Not a hard date, but a ballpark for the core book of Shadowscar.
Originally, we were looking at December of this year.
Mhm.
Due to some art requirements, that's looking like it's less possible. So we're looking at basically, first quarter, first couple months of next year.
All right. And given the uptick in virtual tabletop over the last few years, some of it accelerated by the pandemic, but a lot of it was going to happen anyways. We've obviously had a lot of people who primarily run their games on virtual tabletop. Are there plans down the road, obviously not immediately, to have some degree of virtual tabletop support, whether it be through Roll20, through Alchemy, through Foundry, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. We are currently working with some people to get our foot in the door on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a longer discussion to have, but yeah, we are looking at getting it in as many hands as possible for online play, because it is such a big market, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen some people say that the main reason it jumped was because of that period of time where everybody was locked in their houses, but the foundation was already there years ago. All that happened during that period was just things accelerated. It was always, you're always going to have more and more people jumping on that because of convenience or whatever other reason. Hell, the actual play that Zan and I do is through Roll20. So we'll certainly be looking forward to seeing how this develops. And with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you, man, for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple, and I hope you enjoyed your time here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have been here.
Mm-hmm. And anytime you see fit to return, whether it's for more of Shadowscar or just to laugh at the dice gods screwing someone over, because remember, folks, the dice gods hate you, and they show no mercy. Amen.
Amen.
The door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Sin